I am Dr. Olivia Hamlyn. I'm a lecturer at Birkbeck Law School, and I'm also the lead for the Environmental Law Policy and Governance LLM pathway. I also teach environmental problems in the law, which is one of the core modules on that environmental law pathway.
I'm Stewart Motha. I'm a professor of law at Birkbeck, and I teach a module on the environmental law pathway called Law, Nature, and Planetary Justice.
So we begin this module by thinking deeply about the nature of environmental problems, and then we spend the rest of the module talking about some important aspects of environmental law. So, for example, we cover the key environmental law sectors, including industrial pollution, the water environment, air quality, waste, and nature conservation. And we also cover some of the key instruments for regulating the environment. So, for example, licensing regimes, we discuss the use of economic instruments, for example, trading and offsetting regimes. We discuss designating protected areas for nature conservation, and we also discuss different types of environmental assessment. And finally, towards the end of the module, we talk about enforcement and the role of environmental courts and tribunals. So the aim of the module overall is to give students a really solid understanding of the nature of environmental problems and some of the tools and mechanisms that we have at our disposal to help us address those problems. A lot of the teaching on the LLM pathway is research-led. So my current research relates to the relationship between the economy and the environment. And I draw on that research when we cover the using economic instruments for environmental protection. And that research also forms a foundation for ongoing discussions about tensions between economic growth and environmental protection, which arise throughout the course and indeed throughout environmental law more generally.
Nature is a phenomenon that has been treated as an inert backdrop to human activity for centuries. And part of what we need to confront in the context of climate change is the place of nature in relation to social and economic forces. So part of what I will be doing in the module I teach is challenging the status of nature vis-a-vis law and political institutions. So when you think about nature, various kinds of landscapes, non-human animals, and even non-living things come to mind. And the status of these phenomena and things in law is changing. For instance, there are many movements and cases involving the recognitions of trees, animals, and landscapes as legal persons. So in the module, we'll be looking at these developments as well as case studies into how what used to be called natural resources are extracted and exploited in the social and economic systems that currently prevail. The reference to planetary justice also involves a shift from the manner in which humans think of themselves in the world. So there is a deliberate shift from using the term world to using the term planetary. And this helps us to shift the register of time with which we will think about environmental problems. This is another way in which we can shift the human-centered notion of time to think about time in a much more planetary scheme. So that's something about my module, and I thought I would ask Olivia what kinds of problems in relation to the environment got you thinking about environmental law and how you came to work on environmental law?
So one of the key things to understand about environmental problems is that they are highly complex. So they're interconnected, they're transboundary, they're polycentric, and that means that they're extremely difficult to tackle. They're almost pretty intractable, actually. So what I find totally fascinating about trying to address environmental problems is the fact that it's almost impossible to address them perfectly. And we need to have a really sort of solid understanding of environmental problems in order to think carefully about, well, what instrument should we employ to tackle that aspect of a problem? What would work best in this particular scenario? And we often end up with a sort of imperfect kind of collection of instruments which enable us to sort of try and do our best to tackle these things. And I think what's so kind of exciting but also frustrating about environmental law is that it's a kind of constant struggle of sort of testing different things and using our imaginations to try and address these things. So it's what I like about it is that and what's kind of challenging about it is it is a sort of never-ending struggle and journey. Yeah. So a question for Stewart as well. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind your module.
Well, I worked on native title cases, so that's Indigenous land rights cases in Australia many years ago. And one of the really important issues I worked on was the burial of nuclear waste in Australia. So Australia is regarded as a relatively geologically stable continent, which it is. Australia also exports large amounts of uranium. It's one of the world's larger producers of uranium. And the uranium goes elsewhere, to Europe, to the UK. And when it's used to produce energy, there is a production of waste. So there was an argument that the government at the time was using to say that this waste should be shipped back to Australia and buried there, with a whole set of questions about the implications of that for the Indigenous community and for the wider population in Australia. So that was one of the early inspirations, the relationship between the extraction of what are referred to as resources. Again, I think that's a problematic way to think about minerals and other elements and things in the world, and the impact that has on human and non-human life. So that was an early inspiration, and I think that has continued, where I think about the way in which law is responding to the demand to shift the relationship that humans have to what used to be called nature, and that this nature was something that many people still think is there for humans to exploit. And I think the current calamitous, catastrophic state in which we find ourselves has a great deal to do with that categorization of nature. And so part of what the course tries to do is challenge those basic ideas. So we hope that what you've heard from us today, which is just two of the courses that you would take on the LLM pathway, would inspire you to come and join us at Birkbeck, which is just celebrating its 200th anniversary. We've been teaching a whole range of diverse students for 2 centuries, and we look forward to welcoming new generations of students to the law school.